History documentaries are a lot of fun. I like history, which probably isn't saying much considering that's most of what I talk about, but I can appreciate when a film is able to take a complicated topic and tie it all together. The Fandom is an example of a team that understands how having a clear theme and narrative makes as big a difference as getting your facts right. Instead of focusing on the details of everything in this film, which honestly deserves its own video, I'll be going over its major points and themes and how the creators chose to present them. One of the first things that stuck out to me when watching this film is, interestingly, the choice of format. The Fandom is primarily an oral history, meaning interviews with people about a topic of choice. There's no narration except for the occasional descriptive text. All we hear are the voices of those who were there and involved, past and present. It's the narrative of choice when talking about marginalized groups because of how effective it is. A good example is the 2012 film How to Survive a Plague, which frames the intense struggle that AIDS activists faced in the late 1980s and early 90s. You're not being told directly by a historian what the major themes are. The experiences of these people act as our guide, and those larger themes are incorporated into the composition and direction of the film. It's more subtle, but frankly more impressive from a writing standpoint. The film's themes are emphasized through a past-present repetition. It's an excellent way of providing context to how our culture has changed, but also how much has stuck around. Take the example of Bubbles, the conchair of Denver, who's compared with Mark and Rod, the conchairs of Conference. Despite the gap in years, we see just how similar their beliefs are as convention organizers.
It became the most important thing in our lives.
I wanted to jump up on the Empire State Building and sing an aria about it.
I mean, my life is the Fandom, and I don't know where I would be now without it.
We also follow artists and the idea of personas, since it not only provides general context for what personas are and what they do, but also how they led to today's ever-present demand for art. Both of these narrative techniques, oral history and repetition, make for a natural and comprehensible progression that the viewer can follow without having to rewind and catch details that they might have missed. It helps that the pacing of the film is easy to follow, but also that the direction didn't get bogged down in the details. They've done their research, and there aren't any glaring factual inaccuracies, but I say this as someone who went to school for history. If you cannot present your argument in a clear and concise manner, it doesn't matter how much stuff you throw in. They could have talked more about Voodoo, about the larger historical connections to science fiction and comics fandoms, about how Furry shifted from being small and artist-focused to being more generally fan-focused. But doing so likely would have taken away from the clarity of the theme, or at least made the film longer, which can also detract from the theme. Clarity is the telltale sign that Ash's background is in cinematography, and that she's working with a damn good team. That's something they should all be recognized and praised for, if anything. When looking at the Fandom, there's an overarching theme that talks about the power of fandom as a community, but with three main points: group identity, self-discovery, and expression. Let's look at each of these one by one. The power of group identity is what the entire film builds upon. We're introduced to people who associate strongly with the furry community and learn how much it's affected their lives on a personal level. By hearing these stories, the stereotypes about furries are systematically broken down with clear, personal examples of positive impacts. One of the moments shown to us is arguably the most powerful of a fan's life: catharsis. It's when you, as someone who didn't have much community before, have the epiphany that
I'm not the only one. I always thought I was weird. I always thought no one else would understand. And here are people who are just like me.
It gives a fan a sense of purpose, a feeling of legitimacy, that who they are matters after a lifetime of being told otherwise. That gut feeling is shown by how strong of a connection is created to the community they now identify with, and how those connections they've made with others have led to a greater sense of belonging.
I really feel like I owe a lot to the community just because it's taught me so much. It's made me become much more of an open and understanding person.
I don't think that I would have been the person that I am today if I didn't have furry cons. No doubt.
This is what allows self-exploration and discovery in fandom to happen. Something that confuses other fans, not to mention people who aren't fans, is why furries are so LGBTQ. It's a complicated spiderweb of factors, but the film guides us through with just enough historical context to make sense of it all. Fan culture as a whole, beginning with science fiction fans, followed by underground comics artists centered around a subject with no canon, then followed by fans using personas and online communications to explore it on a personal level. And that's still a simplification of all that happened. Only reason I know that is because a thesis statement I wrote in college was on this exact subject. The film does cover all the major points though, and while more context about fan culture would have made things clearer to non-fans, just starting with furries are fans of anthropomorphic animals and working from there at least keeps the narrative concise. That seems to work far better for their slice of life approach, rather than an academic let's analyze every connection sort of style. Back to the point of discovery. The film's emphasis on community shows that it passively created opportunities for self-exploration. The historical context helps us make sense of the why because we see where it comes from and how it stands today compared to then. The focus is largely on gender and sexuality, but discovery applies equally to every part of a person's identity. It's intimate, it's raw, and that's why it works so well thematically. Whether it's Yippee Coyote using fursuits to come out of his shell and be himself, or Sasha and Nate learning more about their own genders through their art or personas, clear examples are given of the community's power in enabling them. Through smart use of composition, each individual story is given a sense of weight, ranging from lighthearted and loud to soft and deep felt. It's not explicitly said, but it's there loud and clear. We are all different, and we're proud of who we are. With discovery comes expression, and this ultimately is what the film celebrates. Putting yourself and what you make out there is what makes the furry fandom what it is. Some of the most impactful scenes in the film deal with expression.
Trans experiences are just human experiences. Ultimately, furry is also about human experiences.
They all emphasize how powerful the fandom has been in making this happen for them, and you see this over and over throughout the film. Not to mention how many people say similar things on how much this ability to express matters to their well-being. And please tell me I wasn't the only person that teared up about Nate's story and that trans statistic. Fox and Pepper make surprisingly effective film ambient. Who would have guessed? It frames furry expression in the larger context of LGBTQ expression, and how that road to it was, and is, faced by opposition from without and within. That ties into one other minor point, and that's perception. The way the film addresses the issue of Conference's media coverage and the flame wars that followed was done in probably the best way one reasonably could. It does not shy away from the ugly side because that perception ended up mattering more than what actually happened. Perception explains Kage's beliefs and decisions when he started running Anthrocon, because while he downplayed the role of sexuality in the fandom for the media, it was because he thought it was the right thing to do at that time. It explains the blame put on Mark and Rod, since as con organizers they were easy targets, but as a couple, they also faced thinly veiled or outright homophobia. Accusations of orgies and pedophilia have historically been put on queer people, and those same accusations were directed at these two and at furs as a whole for becoming a majority LGBTQ community. The film recognizes this, but more importantly, it takes a clear stance on the issue by showing us the opposing points of view before bringing us back to the main theme. Despite the problems faced in the past, the fault was not with furries being LGBTQ, but instead with those who wanted that kind of expression suppressed completely. Staying true to its message, community is brought back in a nice bit of ring composition, since now with the background we've learned throughout the film, the central argument is made that much stronger. The truth comes out just by looking at what the fandom gives. Genuine human experiences. All in all, the fandom is currently the best documentary out there that explains furries and their history in a holistic way. The historical context is smartly written in a way that flows seamlessly with the major themes, and it has a strong grasp of what makes the fandom unique in its own right. Even if you're not a furry, I still highly recommend this film, since it explains those themes in a way that just about anybody can understand. Kudos to Ash and the crew for making such a fantastic film. I honestly can't wait to see what all they come up with next. If you thought this was cool and wouldn't mind a video about all the historical details of this film, let me know. There's a lot of cool bits only briefly shown or talked about that have all sorts of neat background material. If you like this content, feel free to drop a like or subscribe. I make videos. Sometimes.